It's tragic, really.
Shirley, are you here?
We all have a story.
We are contacting 911 for you.
A dark secret wrapped in emptiness and regret.
Quite frankly, I'm glad I did it.
You know.
They took her life.
They just can't prove it.
The toll. I'm Nancy Simpson. I've worked at KTTS Radio in Springfield, Missouri for over 2 decades. Before taking over as morning show co-host, I served as investigative reporter and anchor in the newsroom for 20 years, many of those years as the assistant news director. I'm also a storm chaser, demanding job physically and emotionally. When I decided to take on this project, I wasn't really worried about interest, not at first. I knew the story was intriguing at the very least. I already had relationships with some of the people I'd be interviewing. It was time. Not my time, although my job is demanding and I'm a mom. It was that this story was over 4 decades old. Investigators, other players in this project, many can't be found and many aren't on this earth anymore. I knew that part would be tough. I'm talking about time in that sense. Shirley's cousin on her dad's side started a campaign, found out fairly recently that her cousin had been murdered and no one was ever held accountable for that. A campaign called Justice for Shirley Jane Rose. She started asking area media to take a look at the case. One TV station did a basic story, but no other takers. The story is very old, and newsroom staff already doing way more with less, like so many other industries. I told her I'd dig in, try to dedicate some time to a podcast project and see what happens. And what I found, many have a connection to this little girl, and plenty are willing to open their hearts and talk about it. Shirley Jane's body was found in an area around McDaniel Lake north of Springfield by a man described as a caretaker of the property. That would be Roy Shelton and his friend Lawrence Thompson. They were walking back from checking on their beaver traps and they see what appears to be body parts under a clump of trees. Looks like animals exposed the upper part of the shallow grave. It's described as a couple of inches of dirt still on the lower part of the body. Detectives used dental records to make a positive ID. That December 13th is a Saturday. By 7:30 that night, they know it's 9-year-old Shirley Jane Rose. Detective Bill Lloyd says the medical examiner believes the child had been strangled. Her blouse, the white one with the embroidery design and pull string on the collar, it's knotted around her neck. The decomposition is pretty far along according to the papers, and Lloyd says there's no way to determine if she'd been sexually assaulted. He's quoted as saying the body has been in the grave for some time. Investigators sweep that area with a metal detector, but nothing. A full search on Sunday. Nothing. 2 days after Shirley Jane's remains are discovered, a 22-year-old man was given a lie detector test. The results are described as inconclusive. A sergeant tells the paper the man would likely be released unless further evidence implicates him. Another former officer who used to ask about the case, not directly involved, tells me a student from a local Bible college was also questioned in Shirley's murder, was hinky during the polygraph, never charged, of course. That could fit here. He might be one of the names that was bleeped out earlier. Investigator Steiger from Seattle, he is not big on polygraphs.
And since you mentioned polygraph, one of my other pet peeves is these detectives back then especially, and they rely way too heavily on a polygraph. They polygraph everybody and then eliminate people based on the polygraph findings. So Gary Ridgway, the Green River Killer, killed 49 people in the Seattle area in the 80s and 90s, and he passed the polygraph back then. Then later DNA proved it was him. So, polygraphs are a tool, but don't rely on them. I worked homicide for 22 years. During that 22 years, I think I had 3 people polygraphed, and they were all people that were allegedly witnesses. And I asked a lot of suspects, would you take a polygraph, just to see what the reaction was. But it's a crush that some detectives use. When I review a cold case, and one of the things when I read, so-and-so was interviewed, he passed the polygraph and has been eliminated as a suspect. And I just want to scream, no, he hasn't. Don't use a polygraph to eliminate anybody, just like you don't use a polygraph to convict anybody. It's just a tool that's way overused, and it was back then especially, but it's way overused still today by people that want an easy out, I guess, or don't know what to do. Do the interview yourself, do a good interview and a complete interview, but don't rely on a polygraph, but certainly don't eliminate anybody based on a polygraph.
Shirley Jane and we have the same birthday. I remember that day well, the day I found out we have the same birthday. November 21st. I'd been researching this story for a while, wondering how a little girl, 9 years old, could have such an impact on so many people. On this earth, 9 years, gone over 4 decades, not even close to being forgotten. And we share the same birthday. The newspaper clippings I got off of microfiche at the local library, they are crap. Folds, chunks of tape, scraped and scratched. I printed off the versions and took pictures of the stories with my phone, hoping zooming in would bring me a little more clarity in a pinch. Couple of days into digging through those old stories, I get to a part that talks about the kids in her class asking the principal if he knew it was Shirley Jane's birthday. November 21st. Well, I needed to be sure that's what it said, so I pulled that article up on my phone. And sure enough, November 21st. I just sat there, staring at it. Then I ran to my producer, Jay Lashley, and punched him in the arm. "You're never going to believe this." October 17th, the day Shirley Jane went missing, is also my son's birthday. There are many ways our lives, Shirley Jane and me, weave in and out, and at that point, any doubt I had about pushing ahead with her story was washed away. One friend said, "It's like she's giving you permission to tell her story." Her story, truly, is how her death still affects so many people. You know, the toll. Shirley Jane's funeral was at Whitechapel Cemetery. From the newspaper, a little more than 70 people showed up, including 2 detectives from the Springfield Police Department. Pallbearers carried a simple pink casket covered in pink flowers from the hearse to the burial site. A pink awning was set up graveside. The sun was out. In the preacher's eulogy, he called her a star in the night. In this day of darkness, there are still stars in the sky. In this time of darkness, let's look at the stars. No cries of pain will ever touch her lips again. The words at the funeral for a murdered 9-year-old girl. Christy Foster, Shirley's cousin who was playing with Shirley the day she vanished, is a good friend of mine. Has been for decades. Threw me a baby shower type of friend. We worked together in the newsroom at KTTS. One night during a road trip, she told me about her cousin's disappearance, murder, and how the case was never solved. Whoa, right? What a conversation. Just one conversation. We never talked about it again. Until now. Christy wasn't allowed to go to Shirley Jane's funeral.
I remember seeing my mom and dad get in the car and leave for the funeral. So it's like I had some sense that I, knew something had happened, but I didn't get to go. I wasn't allowed to go to the funeral, which kind of wished that I would have been. But I guess mom and dad thought I was only 6, and then I wouldn't understand that maybe I'd be traumatized. I don't know what they thought, but I have that memory of seeing my mom and dad leave for the funeral. My mom wearing that blue velvet coat with the white fur collar.
Police say many people have been questioned at this point. I filed a Freedom of Information Act concerning several angles on this story and was denied. The letter says it's still an active investigation. I talked to Lieutenant Wilson about this.
As an active investigation, it means that we're still taking tips on it. It's still actively assigned. Probably in the paperwork is not assigned to a specific detective, but it's still being actively worked. On an investigation like this, if this case was closed, we could, and I usually deal with the sunshine law. On a closed case, they would give you a copy of that. With this case still being active, without a suspect being charged, we don't know who killed Shirley. We don't want to put all the information out there to everyone to see, because hopefully we have some information here that we can use that suspect, if we get a good suspect, gives us to match up. We want that. So we don't want it all out there for everyone to have.
When you talk about working a case that's 43 years old, some people may think, especially some members of the family, that it just sits on a shelf somewhere. Can you talk about how that's just not true?
It's not true. We have other cold cases. The one that comes to everyone's mind is the 3 missing women, of course. It's actively assigned. These don't sit on the shelf for a long period of time. They do sit on the shelf longer than we would like them to, just because of basically it's manpower issues. the amount of detectives we have to work the cases that we have. As the years go by, they do set sometimes, but we take these cases and go over them. We just went over all our cases when we do all our cold cases. We go through and look, and usually we try to get somebody that hasn't seen them before, because that new perspective, unfortunately, it's the time and them going through these cold cases, we try to see that obvious thing and say, hey, we haven't done this. And a lot of times we're looking for, especially in these old ones, DNA. Have we sent the DNA off? On this case in particular, in Shirley Jane Rose, we have sent hair and evidence off and received nothing conclusive back. And so we're entertaining this again. We're going to look at it. In fact, I was talking to the lab today about sending this up again just to have them look at it again and say, hey, since the last time we sent this off, has anything changed with technology? So I'm making this a real long answer to your question. Do they sit on the shelf? Yeah, they do sit on there, but we still take them down and go through them and try to find new things. This case here is pretty tragic, and as a lieutenant over the unit, it's always set in my mind. I've always kept this kind of in my office, and when I get the chance, I open this thing up and just go back through some stuff and see if I can find more information, dig a little bit on it. But again, the time constraints for me, we have cases going right now that have to be dealt with. And unfortunately, if it was a perfect world, I'd have one detective on every one of these cold cases working it, but it's not.
The three missing women.
Cases like this, the three missing women, those kinds of cases, they never get resolved.
Like the three missing women, I almost want to see that in the news all the time.
And it had Shirley's in there, and Shirley's was really short. It had the three missing women story.
The three missing women case where officers still take reports.
The three missing women case, well, it's another big case in our area. A mom, daughter, and her daughter's acquaintance disappeared from a home in Springfield on June 7th, 1992. It was the night of high school graduation for the two girls. They had left a party and were last seen just after 2 a.m. Stacy's parents contacted police saying no one was at the home of Cheryl Levitt, not Cheryl, her daughter Susie Streeter, and not their daughter, Stacy McCall, who decided last minute to spend the night in that house. Police say there were no signs of a struggle. Their purses, money, clothes, cars, keys, cigarettes, and the family dog, all still there in that house. The women were just gone. In 2003, some whack job called me confessing he had kidnapped and murdered the women. He was never arrested that I know of, but the ordeal was terrifying. I recorded the conversation in the newsroom, realizing very quickly this guy wasn't messing around. He called me before my 4 o'clock news, rattling off a series of directions and a riddle. I told him to call back in 6 minutes. And it was 6 minutes to the second. I know this because he creeped me out, and I was waiting, ready to record our conversation. He outlined areas near Springfield, landmarks, a power plant, directions of where he had dumped the bodies.
Back in the 70s, early 70s, a new power plant was built in Springfield, Missouri. Actually, you call it Brookline. They moved my house to build the power plant. Find the house. You find the girls, and that's where they are.
He was concerned at one point that I was trying to keep him on the line, trying to trace his call.
How did you kill him?
I cut Cheryl Levitt's head off. The other two girls were strangled.
Did you rape them?
No. It wasn't a sexual crime. What are you talking about?
I don't know.
No, you're trying to make it sound sexual.
No, I'm not. I don't know.
It wasn't nothing like that. It wasn't about sex. It was about money.
Yeah, I had no clue my shift was going to wrap up like this. I just continue asking questions. I was shaking and crying by the end of our 20 minutes. I called the prosecutor, who told me he had thousands of people who said they knew who killed the women, but not one who said, "It's me." He wanted a copy of the tape and wanted to know if we were going to air portions of it. I said no. At this point, it's just some weirdo. He sent an investigator over to come get the tape.
I'm laying this all in your lap. Once I hang up the phone with you, I'm done with it. I mean, I'm not trying to rid myself of any guilt because, quite frankly, I'm glad I did it.
No guilt.
I ain't got a bit of remorse.
Are these the only 3 people you've killed?
No, well, they're not the first. I never done it 3 at a time, but
I kept a journal through this ordeal. In there, I write, "For some reason, this weirdo stood out. It's all I could think about the entire newscast." I was reading the words, but not paying attention to the stories. I did make sure I was off the air by 4:06, and sure enough, 6 minutes to the second, the phone rings. I reach over, set up the recorder to record our conversation, and answer the phone. "KTTS News, this is Nancy," he says. "It's me." That's where the tape and transcript start. In the beginning, I felt he was just wanting to give me directions to Cheryl Levitt's body, give me a riddle about his old house and the other 2 girls, and hang up. But for some reason, he got comfortable, started talking with me. And the more I asked questions, the more he answered. I felt this chill down my spine when I asked him how he knew where to find the bodies. He answered, "Because I'm him." And there was just something about that.
Any regrets?
Any regrets?
Yeah,
That I didn't do it sooner. I'm not trying to be a very nice guy.
I understand.
And the only reason I'm calling you is because I got a guilt trip from my mother. So,
Oh, she knows?
oh yeah.
Well, how could she put you on a guilt trip?
Well, my brother just recently passed away, and I had to come back to the country for his funeral.
I see.
So, my mother made me feel that maybe his people, or their people, might need some closure.
I see.
So there's your closure. That's all the closure they're getting. At least I'm giving them the bodies back.
You're really mad at them over drug. Are you still mad over the drugs?
No, it's not the drugs, it's the money.
It's the money.
My news director at the time, Morris James, stayed out until 2 in the morning, driving around and trying to find the landmarks. He said maybe this guy was drugged out when or if he did it and had a few things confused. It was 9 days before Christmas. I was scared to death, no joke. The man said my name on the phone the first go-around. My family went away for the holiday, but I had to work. As police drove around trying to put pieces together and make sense of the conversation, I couldn't stay in my home. I had to be escorted to my car and was in pretty much lockdown for a few days. Our big boss pulls me into his office, as our company at the time could fly some helpers down from our mother station, WTMJ, and help coordinate if this ended up being the killer. But realistically, he said, there was only so much they could do to protect me from the media frenzy this would cause. In an email I saved, it says that we were planning on running the interview in the next 24 to 72 hours, getting the green light from the company's attorney. That never happened. The mystery man on the phone had given me a name. It was an inmate in prison. Told me I needed to talk to this inmate to verify his story. The inmate and his buddy were in prison for killing people and burning bodies in barrels. When I called the sheriff at the time to ask him about these men, he used cuss words. Yep. Told me these were bad men, bad men, and to rethink whatever it was I was digging into.
Why you're calling now? Do you
Well,
just want to tell somebody?
Yeah, I kind of felt the need to let somebody know.
Why did you do it?
Drugs. Because the old bitch owed me.
What about the girl that the innocent girl, as they say, the one that was just kind of tagging along?
She was just she happened to be there.
Wrong place at the wrong time?
She happened to be, get off of me. She happened to be there.
Will you tell me where the other 2 can be found?
I just did.
Oh, the power plant, the house. Okay.
I just did.
Why is the lady somewhere else?
Well, because the other 2 were an afterthought.
Did you think about letting them go?
Yeah, actually I did.
Why didn't you?
Because I couldn't. But I will tell you this. I'll give you a little helpful hint. They didn't move the house too far from the power plant. You got a 5-mile radius.
Are you going to be leaving the country soon? Is that why you're confident enough to call?
That's right.
Were you alone?
No.
Aren't you putting your friends in jeopardy?
No.
No.
One of them's already, actually the only other one's on death row. So, one's dead and one's on death row, so.
It's just you.
It's just me. You need to personally go there and talk to him. I'll be speaking talking to him within the next 20 minutes.
So I called my contact at the Department of Corrections and asked to get a message to that inmate. Police were watching. Yeah, they were watching. They called me and said if this man in prison said he would talk, but only to me, then I was going. And they were going with me. Holy schnegies, right? Well, the inmate didn't call me back, but his mama sure did. Yep, she was very pleasant to me, saying her son had been good in prison and just wanted to do his time and get out. She tells me she agrees that if her son had any information that I had to ask. She said he'd be calling me tomorrow. And that didn't happen. Apparently, she was not so friendly to police, saying they were not going to pin these murders on her son and that he wouldn't be talking to them from prison in Moberly. The ashes that were scattered after the bodies were burned in barrels were scattered near the area where the mystery man told me he dumped the 3 missing women. A detective called me and said some officers were headed to the prison. This would have been Christmas Eve, and thought about taking me, but reconsidered. He says he thought he'd be doing the case and the families an injustice if they didn't try talking to him first. He says he checked the inmate's phone log. I was the only one who called. The mystery man had not, as he said he would.
He was convicted of cutting 3 people up and putting them into 55-gallon drums. You need to go personally speak to him. I'm going to give him your name. He won't talk to nobody else. He's on death row.
That inmate is not on death row. I didn't get much of an explanation about this mystery man in the end. Active investigation. Police told me the man who called me was from this area at one time, but had moved to another state. He was drunk or high, and that's about all of an answer I was given. My conversation with him was transcribed and is now an official document tucked in the dozens of binders linked to this case. It appeared to be another dead end.
Fast forward to the 25-year mark of the 3 missing women. Not anniversary, Stacy's mom would say. Janice says an anniversary is something you celebrate, something that is nice. This is not nice.
This was simply a point in time for the 3 missing women. I had called her many times over the years to do this same type of interview. She thanked me for not asking her how she was doing. Empathy. She said, as the days passed, and the weeks passed, and then the months passed, it got harder and harder because I didn't hear from them. I didn't hear from Stacy. And I kept thinking, she wouldn't have done this. And she wouldn't have. I know what the chances are of her coming back. But why take that one little, bitty, tiny chance and take it away from me? After the interview, she asked for a favor in return. Would I come DJ the candlelight vigil? Say what now? She insisted it had to be fun, no tears. This one had to be fun. Made me promise and promise again. I wasn't a DJ at the time. I was in news, but a beloved DJ, Rick Moore. So I turned around in the newsroom, looked out the window, and you're pointing to you and me do it. And you come in and you were like, I know the McCalls.
Yeah.
And you knew Stu and Janice.
Yeah, I knew them well. They had a nonprofit called One Missing Link that, we did trail rides and auctions and all kinds of things to benefit their nonprofit. And yeah, they'd become friends over the years. So yeah, when you asked, I was like, no brainer. Yeah, we can do this. But how do we make it fun?
That because I told you, it has to be fun.
It had to be fun.
I promised. And I kind of didn't understand it at the time, but she was very adamant about it.
Yeah, and so I thought, well, okay, let's not even mention what happened. Let's just go back in time and let's talk about where were you in 92?
That was the year the women went missing.
That was the year, and thought, let's just all go back there and we'll have some fun. We went to the park. We had snippets of hit songs from 92, both pop and country. We had sound bites from the hot movies from back then.
Yep.
And we had fun.
We set up a whole DJ mobile booth with the tent. Yeah, and you were like the best Christmas presents that year for kids.
Yeah.
The best toys. You'd have clips of like the commercials and stuff, and the best movie that year.
Yep.
Yeah, and you had it all on CD, and we'd holler out, what movie was that?
Yeah, exactly. And it became kind of a game show, just a fun event.
We have the sheriff there on the front row.
Sheriff Larnall was there.
And
he was playing along.
Who've worked the event.
I remember Janice. Achy Breaky Heart was huge in 92. It was huge. And she's just yelling and screaming. I love that song.
We had to play it twice.
The whole thing. Not just a snippet, had to play the whole song.
The whole song. So we had our tent there, and you had the equipment that you were playing on. We had the big speakers. All the TV crews were showing up, right?
Yeah,
this is
the TV
a
stations
huge
were there.
Story. This is 25-year anniversary.
Yeah.
They're all there for, it's a candlelight vigil. It's at a memorial park here in Springfield. And, they're there to cover it. Janice, what does she do? Okay, so first the family sets all the signs up against our tent, right? The three missing women, the posters, all of that.
Yeah, the pictures of the girls.
And Janice wants to be right next to you.
Oh, she was the life of the party.
She was.
She really was.
Pulled her seat right up next to you. She grabbed our microphone.
She took the mic and just...
Okay, there's this one point when you were like, you remember this one? And it was, I like big butts. She grabbed that microphone and she was like, I hated when that song came on.
But she knew it. She knew the words to it.
She did know it. She did. Well, and so we took an event and we had to make it fun. And I think we did a good job.
Nancy, what was the name of the things that we released at the end of the night?
The lanterns.
The lanterns.
Yeah.
You put like a candle in them, and they drift off up in the air, and we released one for each one of the girls.
Yeah.
And that was pretty magical.
And then Stu took the microphone, and then we really all realized, like, why we were doing this. And he said, I told Janice that this had to be fun because I was not going to come here again and bury my daughter.
Yeah.
And then we all realized the impact. And Janice said, this is it. I'm done with interviews. I'm done with vigils. I'm done. I'm tired. That woman has been fearless.
But I got probably one of the best hugs I've ever had in my whole life that night.
Yeah.
From both of them, from both Stu and Janice. So that was...
Yeah. Why did you feel you had to be there?
It never entered my mind not to. It was such a part of all of our lives, the story itself. And then once you get to know Stu and Janice, it's just like, yeah. It's the very least you can do.
I do think the crowd thought we lost our minds.
Yeah, but I think they all lost their minds for a little while, too.
Oh, my gosh. Yeah. Yeah. Maybe we'll get some answers in that case, too, someday.
You continue to pray that maybe one day the whole thing will be solved, but I don't know. And even to this day, after all these years, it happened not too long ago. I was on a camp trip, and somehow it came up. People were throwing out theories still that it's never going to go away. It's part of the community, and it's going to be here with us, hopefully, till one day it's solved.
Why? Why was Shirley Jane murdered, right? Well, just about everyone you talk to about this case has the same story. I heard the mom was into drugs, owed a debt, and Shirley's life was the price that was paid. From what you see in the newspapers at the time, Joyce would adamantly deny this drug deal theory. She would not deny parts of it later. Mike Crowder was a reporter at KTTS back in 1975. Before we get to this story, I want to express to you how close all of this played out from our radio station. Grandma's house? You could walk there from here in like 2 minutes, then another few minutes or so to Shirley's home. Really close. KTTS radio was located in downtown Springfield initially. I asked around to folks who would know, and the building we're in now opened in June 1976. So that would be the next year after her murder. Back to Mike Crowder, a reporter at KTTS during Shirley's disappearance. Mike describes how scenic the road where Shirley was supposedly taken from was fairly busy. Not a lot of main roads we use now existed at that time, so scenic is a main north-south thoroughfare through town. Fairly busy road.
Well, as you came down the hill on Scenic from Sunshine, as I recall, on both sides of the street, once you passed the bridge, there was a trailer park, which had been there as long as I could remember, being a kid, and it really wasn't a nice place, kind of run down and seedy. None of the stuff was here that was on the right-hand side of the street as you went past where the fire station is now in the park. It was just open field. You wouldn't want to break down in that neighborhood that time because it's just kind of seedy.
Was her house kind of a lone house then?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, stood by itself. It's where the plumbing place is now. I mean, it kind of stood out because it was the only thing that was there as I remember.
As Mike was coming to the station to talk to me about this story, he took Scenic right by Shirley's old house. So, his story. Well, Mike says back in the mid-'70s, there were many animal sacrifices and talk of satanic rituals. It's late October, early November, 1975.
Back when they were looking for her, there were animal rituals going on. Farmers would be calling the sheriff and saying, I've got a cow that's just been mutilated out here. And those things were popping off everywhere in southwest Missouri, just about every county, as I remember. And then there was a tip that the police got that there was going to be a human sacrifice at a quarry north of Springfield. And I assumed that that human was going to be Shirley Jane Rose. And later, after I talked with the head of detectives, Richard Moses, he said, yeah, that's our information. He's off the record. I said, well, I understand. And he says, we've got some detectives going out there. I think it was on a Friday night. And I said, please, you got to let me go. He finally agreed to let me ride along. So I showed up at police headquarters, went into the detective squad, and met 5 or 6 guys. And they said, well, let's go. So I had my cassette recorder and my microphone, and we went to a little restaurant and had coffee, and detectives were giving people a hard time in the restaurant that they knew because they'd actually either A, arrested them, or B, interviewed them about something, and they felt like they knew those guys. So they were having a little fun with them and getting their kicks that way. And then they said, well, we better go. It was getting close to midnight. And so we got in the car and we drove out to some old abandoned quarry. We got out of the car and they said, okay, now we're going to have to be quiet, no smoking, nothing like that to give our position away. And this one detective says, do you know how to work a shotgun? And I said, yeah. He said, here. And he handed me one. I wasn't a cop, but I was armed, and I still had my cassette recorder and microphone. So those are the 3 things I took to the stakeout. Hunkered down behind some big boulders, stayed there. And it was about 12:30 or so. They said, well, this is a bust. No one showed up. Nothing. So got back in the car and came back to town.
What were you thinking that whole time?
I didn't know what to think. I didn't know what was going to happen. They were going to start shooting if the people that showed up were real bad hombres or what. The whole scenario wrote. But then it was, okay, let's pack up and go home, which I was kind of grateful for. It was a trip, I'll tell you, and I, to this day, remember it.
He also talks about what he learned from detectives. He married one of those detectives' daughters.
He said, we know who did it, but we just cannot prove it. We don't have the evidence to nail him to the wall. So the police this whole time knows who did it, but apparently they just couldn't find the substantial evidence to take it to the prosecuting attorney.
Springfield Police Lieutenant Cully Wilson and Sergeant Todd King actually pulled that report, and we talked about it. Mike Crowder, he wasn't joking.
Yeah, the report starts out, when you start reading it, your Detective Lloyd was gathering information, referenced the possibility of Shirley Jane Rose being kidnapped by members of a satanic cult group, and I'm actually reading that from the report. And he even gives background that in the 7 weeks prior to her disappearing, there was a whole bunch of cattle mutilations, and that veterinarians couldn't figure out what this cattle mutilation thing was about, and that the people in the outlying areas of Springfield had armed themselves and were pretty up in arms about this cattle mutilation and possibly satanic cults. And they go into this report, and he does a pretty extensive job of talking to people in Springfield about the occult, satanic rituals, even flying airplanes all over southwest Missouri with that time, I think it's doctor, there was a doctor. Yeah, southwest, let's see. They had professors from then SMS fly with them to point out possible cult meeting areas and satanic stuff. So they really went into the satanic part and the occult. Let's see, I'm just kind of looking through this thing. I'll tell you this, at the end of this, he does, he gets the highway patrol to help them. You talked about a quarry. You talking about the quarry down at Joplin they went to?
No, this was north of Springfield.
Okay, there was one north of Springfield, and there's one, they went to one in Joplin and looked at it. So they went all over the area, and you see it, I'm flipping through this. One of the areas was marked was near McDaniel Lake. That kind of, one thing stood out. They talk about the Posse Comitatus, some different satanic cults that were possibly around the area. After all this, they went to Dallas County. After all this, the detective writes, in summation, with reference to Shirley Jane Rose, I was unable to uncover one piece of evidence of concrete nature that this girl was kidnapped by a particular group or any group of occult people. Here again, this does not mean it didn't happen. It simply states that due to the complex structure and extreme secret activities, these people, it's very difficult to become involved in the inner circle, and people do not want to talk about it. So he found nothing that led him to believe that, a cult member or a satanic group. And after, reading this, I couldn't find anything where, there's some piece of evidence that led to one. But it's pretty interesting about all the work he went through just to deal with that end of it.
13 pages. So what do you make of that report as an investigator?
They were taking it seriously. I mean, they did. They took it seriously then. And they, after reading this, they contacted several people who did admit that they were cult members and in the satanic worship. And some of them were very cooperative with him and told him how they did what they did. They denied human sacrifice, the ones he talked to. But, I mean, he flies all around. They searched the area, Fantastic Caverns, Dallas County, Buffalo. They went to Texas County, all around Springfield, up around McDaniel Lake, Joplin. So they took it seriously, and as I know, they were getting calls, tips that it was satanic worship. So, you had to look into it.
Is that a sign of the times back then?
Probably. I don't know. I don't hear much about satanic worship anymore. Have you got one?
No, but if we had a case similar to this today, and we got a call that was part of the case, we would go down that path and see where it took us. And if it took us 13 pages into it to rule it out, then that's what we would do, because you've got to follow those. If you don't have another lead that's telling you that it's going a different direction, and even if another lead told us it was going a different way, once we hit a dead end, we'd come back to it and walk that path too. So
at the beginning of this, you go, oh my gosh, they went on this tangent with the satanic. But he even puts in his report that he talked to his lieutenant, which is Lieutenant Moses at the time, about the satanic stuff, and it was decided that we should at least in some measure begin some type of investigation of the possibility of a satanic worship cult in around the Springfield area. So from the beginning, it sounds like, just trying to read between the lines, he's like, do I need to go down this rabbit hole? And they decided, yeah, we better look at it. And at the time, they contacted, this really doesn't have anything to do with the case other than this part of that, but I don't know if you remember Frank Farmer from the News Leader.
Oh.
He used to be the farm editor, lived in the area a long time.
Frank Farmer, the farm editor?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes, that is correct. Frank Farmer lived out of Willard. He wrote for the News Leader for years and years and years. And one reason they talked to him was his knowledge and research he'd just done in the area, so they got him involved. And at the time, if you go back, I think that they took this case as serious as we would take any other kidnapped child. It was serious stuff. So
they wanted it solved.
Oh,
you want it
definitely.
solved now, but they too wanted it solved.
And it's hard. You don't want to sit there and go, do I want to solve more than they did? But they were living it and dealing with it, and the family members, and seeing, finding her body out there. So they really had a personal interest in it, and they definitely want to solve.
Investigator Steiger from Seattle talked about old cases and how most seem to have a cult angle. He even brought it up before I did.
Yeah, that's because that's the type of crap you hear in cases like this. And it's always, big mysterious devil-worshipping cult. And no, sorry.
Let's get something back out there. Circle around to what played out in episode 1. The retired Springfield officer, Jack, told us about the Fletcher boys being interrogated, the main investigator believing he heard a confession, and the recorder not being on or working. Steve Fletcher, many say, had a long history with the law. He's the main suspect. Almost everyone you talk to, and I've talked to a lot of people about this case, will allude to it or just outright say it.
It was something to do with her mom.
in the drug deal.
That was a belief for many years that he was involved, that there's some kind of drug deal.
Never could place any hard physical evidence or even anybody that had seen or heard anything. I know that was their prime suspect, but I don't think they ever were able to prove anything.
This guy behind me said, I know you think so-and-so murdered that little girl, but he didn't do it. And I was like, okay, dude, I don't even know what you're talking about. Back then, and he was just like going berserk on me. And later when we put it all together, it was like, this is a pretty weird deal.
It was revenge. That's what Walt told me. Revenge toward the mother. That's what I heard.
And I don't know where I heard this. And this is strictly hearsay, but it was a revenge killing for a drug deal gone bad involving Shirley's mother.
Apparently the whole reason for this thing was because it was involving drugs and money, or a lack of money. That's what caused the whole thing to turn out the way it did.
She talked a little bit about who may have taken her life, and she said no, that Steve had not done it.
Yeah, about that last lady. We'll get to that, I promise. Steve and Chris Fletcher were brothers. Chris died in 1998 and Steve died in 2004. Their parents owned Fletcher's Hickory Pit Barbecue just down the street from the house Shirley Jane called home. They were there for 28 years, close to KTTS. Mike, the reporter, says people from the station would actually go and eat there. When I sat down with Lieutenant Wilson and Sergeant King, we talked about possible suspects, and Fletcher didn't immediately jump out. It's funny how just about everyone I talked to for this project brings up Steve Fletcher, and investigators were kind of like, who now? Not exactly that flippant, but kind of. So why is that? Sergeant King goes first.
I think what you see a lot of times, especially within the community, and this is me talking on other cases, just looking in general, is a lot of times you start to see both from people that have close knowledge to the case to people that have just heard through family over the time, that they all seem to grab at one or two people, and that's where all their attention goes. It's no different than with the 3 missing women or some other cases that we have. There are certain people within those cases that they seem to gravitate towards, whatever that may be. Whatever, maybe it's how they were looked at back at the time of the crime. Maybe they have some responsibility for the crime, whatever it might be. But it's almost as if family, friends, and community gets more tunnel vision than the officers do. And I think the reason that is because they don't necessarily have the insight that the officers do with the whole picture when they're doing their interviews and they're putting everything together. They only have bits and pieces of it, and then they hear secondhand other bits and pieces of it. And a lot of times they try to make it fit what they already know or fit somebody. So sometimes that's what we see happens. Now, could it be just the opposite and Fletcher's completely 100% involved? It's very possible. But as investigators, we don't like to say, everybody's saying it's him, it's got to be him. Because we found too many times in the past that family and friends are focused on one person, and we find it's somebody completely different that they're not even aware of. And we've had to go sit down with the family and convince them that it wasn't this person, it was this person, based off of the evidence and what we have.
I think another thing too, Nancy, and you've lived here for over 20 years. The west side of Springfield over there is still, in the 70s and up till today, is a community within our community in Springfield. And you go over in that area, and it's like a lot of people, everybody knows everybody in a way of speaking. And there's been families that have lived there generations over there. And I think that's a lot of it too, is that community of the west side over there is so connected that this name comes out, and yeah, I know this guy, and my cousin knows, and like Todd says, it keeps going. You just hang on to that name. And I think that's part of it too.
So I have that other Joyce. I know, 2 Joyces in, right? Shirley Jane's mom and sister, but here we are. And this story is important too. We've talked about her before, Joyce Morton. Joyce Morton lived a couple of doors down from Shirley Jane's granny's house. Her husband, Walt, was a Springfield police officer, on the force for many years. He gave polygraph tests in the 80s and 90s. Joyce Morton says her daughter, Missy, and Shirley Jane were the same age, 9. They'd play together quite a bit. Joyce remembers that day, October 17th, the day Shirley went missing. She remembers it well. She's in the car with her kids going out to eat, pulls out of the drive, and they see Shirley Jane walking toward the main road.
Missy wants to stop and pick her up and take her out to eat with us. And she was, of course, begging. You know how kids do. They beg, oh, Mama, come on, Mama. And I said, Missy, I said, I have to go talk to her parent or her grandparents. And I said, we're in a hurry and I want to, and didn't do it. And if I'd taken the time, I don't know if it would have stopped it, but it certainly would have maybe changed things, You think about that. Missy thinks about it. Missy still said, Mama, if we'd only stopped and picked her up, it... Really an ugly thing.
Missy won't talk to me. Her mom tells me Missy hasn't been feeling well, and this story is just something she doesn't want to rehash right now. Your friend is found murdered. You're a kid. I get it. It's okay. I did ask her questions through her mom, though. Missy says they met Shirley as they were pulling out of the driveway on Lombard. Missy waved at Shirley. They watched her turn south onto Clifton. This is also the path the bloodhound would put Shirley on. Missy says that was the way Shirley always went home. Missy was very clear about what she remembers. That path, well, it makes sense. It keeps Shirley off the busy road for longer. But if you'll remember from earlier, it again takes her away from one of 2 intersections where a witness says he saw her walking in a blue Chevy following her. He told police it was at that intersection he made eye contact with the driver, who saw he was being watched and took off. This takes away that intersection, unless for some weird reason Shirley Jane walks a block away from her house before backtracking down a busy street. People say that wasn't like her, to get sidetracked. I don't know. From the information I have, it's hard to make that fit. Missy calls Shirley's brother, Joe, Shirley's protector. He was 13 when she went missing. Took her to Granny's that day, the papers say. Missy says Joe let her know what a nice life she had compared to their life. Missy was very clear about what she remembers. Joyce Morton says Missy had a birthday party in June that year that Shirley went missing. Shirley shows up at the house with matching shirts for the girls.
I've got pictures of her. She came to my daughter's birthday party that was in June. I've even got the shirt that she gave Missy. She bought her the same outfit she had, and they dressed alike. After that was between the time from Missy's birthday in June to whenever she disappeared, they had outfits that matched, and I've still got the little shirt in there that Missy had. I couldn't part with it.
You still have it?
I still have it, yeah. And that's something.
When you talk about the toll on Joyce Morton, for her, it comes in waves. It hits on so many different levels for her. Not long after, weeks, really, after Shirley Jane's body was recovered, Joyce Morton says her family put the house up for sale. It was just too much.
When that happened, everything just changed, and my husband and I both knew, we talked about it, that, we couldn't live there anymore. We just could. It wasn't because we didn't like the neighborhood. It wasn't any of that. It was because the memory, strictly the memory. It was so ugly and so awful. It was like we had to get away from the memory. We had to get away from that. And he went out and he found the house. He went out and found this house and said, I found our house. And I went over and I seen it. And I said, okay, that's great. Playroom for 2 kids and four people in our family. And so we bought it. And it was in January. So you can see, a month later, we got this house, went to the realtor, because he found it. He was driving and found it. and I guess he was looking at houses that were for sale. And we called the realtor, and bought it. Just like that. And we were in here by April.
Joyce Morton is a police officer's wife. She says she pushes this stuff down and tries not to think about it. But she's thought about it plenty. Her son is there with us. He's letting the dogs out and doing some dishes. That's what you're hearing.
But see, I think when they're going down, he's going down Scenic. If she's walking here, he'd had to get her, pull over, get her to come around to that side. There's cars. That's a busy street. How would he get over there to get to her unless he pulled in somewhere? I imagine she was probably on this side, but that was my thought, was she'd be on the west side. And whether she came down this road or whatever and just went over, she would have, even still, he'd had a seat between him and the door. See, I think he knew her, and I don't think she was afraid of him. I don't think she knew to be afraid. Or he picked her up at her house. She was there, he arrives home, and he comes in, in there and just grabs her from there and takes her. Nobody's home.
And back to that. We've asked ourselves this, and others have certainly brought it up. Lieutenant Wilson says, Shirley may have, but it makes more sense to be picked up on the main road. But her making it home can't be ruled out. Remember?
Did she make it home and somebody in the house took her? So yeah, we have to keep that in the scenario, because nobody's saying, yeah, that was Shirley Jane and she was talking to this guy in a blue car. Could she have made it home? Possibly. From the investigation and the officers' interviews there's no direct evidence that she did.
If you believe the bloodhound on Clifton, then maybe you believe the bloodhound when it stops in Teresa's, her friend's, driveway and indicates that's where Shirley's trail goes cold. If you believe the man who saw Shirley a block further away from her home and not the bloodhound, then you have to ask, did she make it further down the road toward her house? To her house? I'm not saying the family had anything directly to do with her disappearance. I'm just asking, did she make it home? I don't know. No one saw her get in a car or be pulled in a car. At least no one's come forward to say they saw that, and that's an undisputed fact. Joyce Morton talks about how busy Scenic was back in the 70s.
I don't know that I would have ever let my daughter, I think about it, which I've let her walk. I think there might have been a time I'd let her walk up to the store. There was a store on the east side of the road that wasn't far from our house, and somebody should go up there and get candy or something. I don't think I would have ever let my child walk down a busy street highway like that, not at 9 years old.
She describes Shirley Jane as the sweetest little girl, well-mannered, never squabbled with the other kids.
She was a darling little girl. Anybody would have she's just adorable. She's the cutest little thing you ever seen. She was just a little doll. And it's just such a terrible shame. She never had a life. She never got, my daughter's had 3 kids, and now I've got great-grandkids from those kids. Shirley never had any of that. Shirley never got that opportunity, and it's just really, really sad.
After the murder, Joyce Morton says she got a degree in sociology and criminal justice with an emphasis on juvenile justice. The toll? She didn't even realize it, only after she started talking with me.
Well, I'll tell you something else that may have influenced me, because it's funny, I started school, I went back to school at 28 and got a degree
in what?
Sociology and criminal justice with the emphasis in juvenile justice. And I did a paper, my final readings was on sexual abuse. But this did impact me, because criminal justice, the only area I really cared about was the juvenile justice. And so, 28, I went back to school after we moved over here.
Got a degree in something so specific.
Yeah, crazy, isn't it? But I'm sure that had the influence on my life. That was part of it that put me in that direction. I want to speak out for children, and having the right kind of environment, raised in the right kind of environment, because there certainly was something wrong there.
Next time on The Toll.
I remember when you just told me about the letter, I was like, whoa.
She was made to stand there
and watch her grave being dug.
One of the guys that found her actually saw a rib cage.
Some sexual psychopath attracted to children, maybe attracted to her specifically prior to this.
If we've got you hooked, make sure and subscribe to The Toll. The Toll podcast, The Path Back Home, is a production of The Toll, LLC. Co-creator and host, Nancy Simpson. Co-creator and executive producer, Jay Lashley. Technical producer and audio editor, Kat Morgan Gaines. Marketing manager, Pamela Shelby. Web design and digital creative director, Shelby Powers. Technical analyst for digital strategy, Christina Oswald. Special thanks to Eliza Blackwood, transcriptionist, and Austin Robertson, voiceover. Original theme by Jay Lashley. Additional music by FirstCom. Reproduction or use of any part of this podcast without the express permission of The Toll LLC is prohibited. Get updates at our website, thetollpodcast.com.